will. Okay, Ernie, I'm going to start the Star Spangled Banner. And then after the Star Spangled Banner, we'll introduce our sponsors and our speaker and our topic for today.
Okay, you can start.
Yeah.
Another great pick, Frank.
Yeah, National Youth Orchestra.
I don't think anybody in that crowd was over 18.
Yes, National Youth Orchestra. Apparently, they do a national tour, and this was recorded a couple years ago.
Okay, before we start the program, I'd like to thank our annual sponsors. There are premium sponsors. We have National Grid, which is a supplier of gas and electric, but in our area, it's gas. And Covanta is an energy company that takes care of most of the garbage in certain villages and towns. And Covanta has been with us for now a year and a half. And then we have Lewis Jones, a very prestigious law firm that has helped us now going on probably 4 years. And we have Gershow Recycling, a very responsible company that recycles automobiles and a whole host of other things that we normally call junk. And they produce a product that is saleable and reusable. So I want to thank all of those people for the help that they give us. And I now want to introduce our speaker. Did I miss anything on the program, Frank? Or is it we're ready to introduce Warren, right?
Go ahead with Warren. I think we're ready.
All right. Warren Axelrod is a man I've had on my radio show in the past. I think it was just twice we had. And he warned way in advance that we were in a very precarious position when it comes to our electric grid system in particular, we talked about. And it was more or less a topic that people were not really paying attention to at the time. And the inference I got when I spoke to Warren was the fact that it's, we're in a very precarious position. And so what has happened is that his warnings have come to pass. He has a lot of experience in the field, and he is his bio is in front of us right now if you can't read it, but he is a real resource. And I'm so happy that I have a relationship with this man because he's somebody who can help us a whole lot. Please welcome Warren.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, now what Warren, I want you to do is make an opening statement, and Frank and I will interrupt somewhere in around 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll start asking questions, and then we'll invite everybody else to ask questions. Is that okay with you? Is that fit with your doing, or do you need a bigger opening?
No, I think that's fine. Thank you, Ernie. The first thing we're doing in the presentation is defining ransomware. And it's materially different from earlier cyber attacks. It used to be that hackers and criminals and nation states, terrorists, would hack into websites and company systems, and they would either destroy data or exfiltrate it and then sell it in the marketplace, like credit card numbers, bank account numbers, things like that. And ransomware is different because the burden is all on the victim. The initial recognition of ransomware, even though it was known maybe 10, 15 years ago, it only the past 3 years or so that we've seen what is visibly a big increase. And what happened initially was that the attackers would come in, take control of the system, encrypt the system, encrypt the data, and then in order for the company to get back into business, they would have to pay for the decryption key, which didn't always work. But in any event, they had the choice, pay the ransom or try to build the system back up from scratch or from backups, whatever was available. There's a newer version of ransomware where before they encrypt the data, they exfiltrate it. They pull it out, and then they threaten the victim company that if they don't pay a ransom, they will see this data on the web for everybody to look at. And so this is a double whammy. And there's actually a third part, the old information security, the CIA triad. Confidentiality is the exfiltration of data, availability is the encryption of the data, and the integrity relates to the system. So with the Colonial Pipeline, you had a situation where they claim they were only looking to get money. But what in fact happened was Colonial shut down the gas and pipelines into the east and the southeast and some of the northeast, and was not supplying fuel for a week or so. That was not a direct effect of the hack itself. It was the response of the company, because they feared that the hack could in fact allow the attackers to take over the pipeline as well. So how prevalent is it? Well, it's increasing, and it's increasing very rapidly. Cyber Reason came out with a report, and I could just quickly go through some of the items. The FBI reported more than 225% ransomware loss increases in 2020. So the ransomware attacks a business every 11 seconds, and that business is getting pretty fed up with the whole thing. The global ransomware damage losses projected to reach 20 billion this year. And they say that prevention is the best strategy. What surprised me was to read that 80% of those who paid the ransom experienced another attack. 66% suffered significant revenue losses. 25% were actually out of business for a period of time. So not only is it at a high level, but it continues to increase. And excuse me, some of the excuse me, some of the numbers that we see are just devastating. And as Ernie and I were talking before the presentation, we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. There are many who are attacked who don't report it to the FBI. It doesn't show up on the media, and so we only are seeing a small fraction of what's actually happening. So it's an interesting article by Matt Steeb, New York Magazine. He had some suggestions which he pulled from various places. One was pretty obvious. Businesses should shore up their defenses, and that intelligence agencies need to continue working, stopping attacks at their access. This is a controversial view. Just last Wednesday, Chris Wray, the FBI director, reiterated that people should not pay the ransom and should immediately report attacks to the FBI. But there are articles. There was one in the New Yorker magazine earlier in the month, and there's one that we see just today, put out, the Booz Allen is helping people pay the ransom. The problem is that the ransom payment is often much less than the damage incurred if companies try to reconstitute their system, even from backups. I know from my experience that it can take days and even weeks, and in some cases even months, to build back the systems. These systems are huge. You don't just flip to a backup. And so we have a situation where there are two sides: pay the ransom or try to bring your system back up, which is usually much more expensive. Paying the ransom, you're subsidizing terrorists, nation states, adversarial nation states, organized crime, and a whole lot of people who shouldn't be subsidized, we put it that way. There's a ransomware and digital extortion task force is looking at the entire process. It suggested that the U.S. should have discussions with Russia and others, and I think that's beginning in order to try and come up with deterrence. And there's a couple of extreme views. One is that there should be laws banning people from paying the ransoms, and if they pay it, they get an additional fine. And that's a very difficult situation. It's very fraught. And the other idea, which I'm not entirely against, is to revert back to paper. I remember with Y2K, in the months before the millennium turnover, we printed out copies of all important documents and stored them off-site on the assumption that if communications were down, systems were down, we could still do some measure of business. So these are some of the suggestions. There's a report which I would refer people to because it's in the preliminary draft form. It's called NISTA 8374, and it's out for review. It's called Cybersecurity Framework Profile for Ransomware Risk Management. It's by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And it's excellent for the kinds of things that you should be looking to do as an organization, as a company. It doesn't get into the deterrent aspects of the nation and the global scale. So really a number of strategies. The ideal is prevention. That's deterrence. Deterrence is to counterattack or threaten to counterattack. And it's recommended that businesses don't do this. You can quickly go down a rabbit hole with that one. Avoidance is a good thing to do. Don't make the critical data available to web-facing applications, and talk about the security architecture and so forth. You have your gold version of the data that's not accessible from the outside, and you download only that which is needed. And then when there are changes made, you have a secure mechanism for updating your database. So these are the prevention aspects.
Warren, I'm not savvy as Frank and Lynn are about the internet, but is there a way of creating a system when every thing that you feed into your system goes to a parallel system that's on board? There would be a backup system, but it would not be something that you'd have to attend to. It would be automatic. Is that possible? And maybe Frank or Lynn would know the answer to that too.
Ernie, I use the grains of sand in the desert analogy. It's possible, as is counting all the grains of sand in the desert. It's just a big job.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there are different levels of backup. You can have hard backup where if your system goes down, you immediately go to the other one. The problem is that cyber attackers can get a hold of the other system. Then you can have sort of a warm or cold backup where everything is stored off-site, and then you have the issue of it takes a long time to build things back up, and then you have to bring things up to the current. When about 20 years ago, when I gave testimony before Congress, November 2001, I suggested, and I wasn't the only one, it was commonly being said that we should have parallel internets, that there should be high security internets that are not available to the general public, that are strongly protected. And that, I think, could answer part of your question.
You know, I was thinking that, but I thought that would be so impossible because you'd have to have separate satellites and everything else, wouldn't you?
Well, it depends where you say. I mean, there is a separate internet. It's called the dark web, and that's where a lot of the damage is done. The other thing is that Chris Krebs, who was head of DHS's cybersecurity unit, has suggested a few times to go after Bitcoin and the other anonymous cryptocurrencies. That's and to regulate them and to actually be able to follow that. One of the big drivers behind ransomware is the ability to get paid in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, which are completely anonymous, and they can't generally be followed unless some other information becomes available.
Well, didn't the FBI follow that money that came from the pipeline company and be able to intercept it with the tracking devices that they have?
Yes, they did, but they claim that this is not the usual case. They happen to get the password through some other source. They didn't describe what. The whole cryptocurrency area is strange because there was just a case where 3.6 billion was stolen in Australia. There's something like 20%, they believe, of cryptocurrencies are not available to people. They forgot their password. They're PCs broke down, where they have their digital wallets and so forth. But even so, it's a mechanism that supports ransomware and these kinds of attacks.
I don't know that where that Bitcoin thing is going, but people who are investing in it, I think they're going to find themselves. Some of them are going to be finding themselves with an empty bag. Bob Barone was asking questions. Bob, are you still there? I guess he went off for a minute.
I'm here.
Muted, Ernie. You got, if you would like him
I'm
to
here.
go ahead.
So, did you want to ask a question yourself, Bob?
Okay. Well, I had a number of questions, so I'll start, I guess, with the first one. And what I wrote was secure. So what I'm getting from this is that secure copies and request and frequent backups only help with the encryption availability portion of the problem. The exfiltration, which is kind of the first time I've been made aware of this, brings another whole dimension to the situation where they broadcast your information, make it available to everybody. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Wow. That's like I say, that's another whole dimension to this issue. I also asked, what is the best defense against ransomware? Is there a set of protocols or recommended steps to take upon being attacked? What do I do as an executive of a company?
I think we have some slides we're going to get to on that.
Oh.
Give us a few minutes, and if you have questions after we get to that section.
Very good. I'll release that to others. I have other questions, but there are other questions being asked by other people.
Okay, so I guess let's get back to the presentation. Warren, I'm going to switch back to the slides.
Okay.
I hope. Share my screen as we were. Okay, back to that.
Okay, so protection area
Sorry.
is where Frank will address that area, and the response is to pay or not to pay. And some cases the restoration is simple, inexpensive. In other cases where the preparation hasn't been done ahead of time, it can be expensive and time consuming, and meanwhile you're not able to do your business. And actually, as the prior question addressed, this NIST report has a lot of very good advice in terms of all of these mitigation strategies and responses. So it's in its preliminary form, but it's still very useful, and I recommend that. It's somewhat objective, so they're not biased in what they're suggesting. Okay, go to the next slide.
Warren, if you would like to provide the link, I can put that into the website for the meeting recap that we create.
Okay, I'll send it to you later.
Great.
The bad guys, well, they're all over the place. The sense is that organized crime is a big player. That there's a lot of money to be made, and it's easy money. I mean, you're basically not at risk physically or electronically, and the demands and payments for the ransoms are just jumping up in leaps and bounds. In fact, one of the things that's been reported is that the hackers have looked into the insurance companies to see which of their customer organizations have insurance and the amount of insurance. They then attack those companies and demand a payment within the insurance limit. so they're pretty sure of getting paid. So it's quite a sophisticated operation. The other thing is that you have freelance opportunists. That is to say, there's the dark side, which was part of instrumental in the Colonial Pipeline attack, is a ransomware as a service provider. That is to say, you don't have to have strong technical knowledge. You can go out, you can get the software, you can get the service, you give them a cut, and it's very easy. So, the hurdle for entry is pretty low. You have independent hacker groups. They're not as obvious. They will do it for interest. They may need some money or whatever, but but it's not their business. They just come in and take advantage. Then the next two are interesting because you have nation-state agencies, which the Russians SVR, the US NSA. We're in there. We do this stuff, and Kim Suk-hee is the North Korean organization, and practically every country has its own agency that is capable of cyber attacking. And then somewhat differently, you have state-sponsored hackers, such as in Iran, the ICA. These are not agencies of the government, but the government looks kindly upon them and doesn't stop them doing what they're doing. They don't order them necessarily what to do. These are mostly terrorists, I would say, who are looking to disrupt.
So Warren, this is something new to me. I only heard about this last week. I saw the CEO of CrowdStrike, which is, as I'm sure you know, a security firm. He was being interviewed on CNBC, the Kramer show.
Yes.
And he said that these ransomware companies are established companies with HR divisions. That's how well established they are. And that the ransomware software is now being rented by anybody who pays the fee and hopes to make the money. So it's actually being offered as software as a service now.
Yes, and those most of these organizations, except for the freelance opportunists, independent hackers, the others are all established organizations
on somebody's payroll.
Yeah, and they that's their job.
Yep.
Okay, so there are a lot of national. What's happening, and this is where we're really in the middle of it, is that these are now national security issues that when these attacks were just affecting, the ABC company, and they had to pay money, and often they were insured for it, so they weren't particularly concerned. That was at one level. But what we've seen more recently with the Colonial Pipeline is a good example, and the JBS meat packing is another example. These ransomware organizations are going after going after parts of the critical infrastructure, the things that we depend on for our day-to-day.
Warren, I wanted to ask you about a very important question. Russia and the United States have thousands of nuclear missiles in silos or places ready to be launched if we needed to. Is that in danger of being triggered as an explosion in place or triggered as a launch? Do you know anything about that?
I have no specific information on that. I have read that there have been attempts to get a hold of control of these systems. And for all we know, the level of control may be much higher than we have any idea. But these are not necessarily ransomware. These are attacks of the what we call cyber physical systems. They go in through the cyberspace side, and they are able to control physical systems. It was like excuse me, when the U.S. and Israel launched the Stuxnet attack. It was a software attack that went in and destroyed the equipment, the Iranian equipment for refining uranium. And so you cannot assume that anything has not been compromised. So what you have to do, which is, should be a standard, is these critical systems should not be attached to the internet in any way. The access should not be there, and that if it has to be disconnected and it's more expensive and it's inconvenient, well, that's too bad. The downside is much greater. So we do have to isolate systems. We have to create separate networks that are only available through very strong authentication.
But we really don't know if that has been done, do we?
Well, let me, I don't think it's clear, Ernie, to you what Warren is explaining, that the military already doesn't put their stuff on the public internet the way even a meatpacking company does. So you asked a question that sort of brought us off into left field here. And Warren's answering it as a general term, but there are two different, horse of a different color. What they built to protect the nuclear arsenal as opposed to what the meatpacking plant has. But yet, they're both critical infrastructure, right? Would you agree, Warren?
I think it's well known that there are foreign organizations that have fully mapped out our electricity grid and transportation systems and telecommunications networks. All of these things are known. And this is a case of balance. There is a deterrence factor that if an adversarial nation state were to go after any of our systems, we would respond by taking out their systems also. That's an area of deterrence, and it's absolutely critical. And there's been discussion, I'll bring it up, but NATO has been discussing at what point would a physical military response be warranted from a cyber attack. One of the issues you have is that cyber attacks, people normally assume the response is also cyber, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, it's there are ways of destroying the physical networks and physical machines of the attackers. So that could happen if it does escalate. And it could also happen with ransomware if the government feels that their agencies themselves are getting overly attacked.
So back to the slides, Warren.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we have we talked about all of the concerns about attacks on the critical infrastructure. They can be ransomware attacks. It's usually not, but they're usually more direct, but they could fall within the category. You also have influence on political processes, disinformation, hacking a voting system. They don't tend to be ransomware, at least at this point. Financial systems, water supplies, food processing, all of these have been subjected to ransomware. And the Cyber Reason report gives a very good outline of the percentage of the different sectors that have been affected here. And there's interference with communications, not so much ransomware, but an area of concern, and theft of intellectual property and military secrets are there, but again, not so much as on a ransomware basis as on a direct attack. However, I mentioned earlier that you have confidentiality and integrity and availability as the triad for information security. The integrity aspect has not been pursued, to my knowledge, in the ransomware field, but it could happen. It could happen. It could happen that the electricity grid is attacked, and they would only escape having the grid brought down if they paid a significant ransom. Now, it's hard to know which countries would do that, but I think North Korea is well known as using different forms of cyber attack to get foreign money. So it could be the next step, which would be even more devastating than where we are now.
You know, we know how very well what an electrical grid failure looks like in Texas. One of the things that I was aware of many years ago was that the grids are generally hooked up to each other. One collapse will lead to another collapse until you go right across the country. That's a possibility, isn't it?
Well, under the current architecture, it is. The approach that we should be taking is the development of microgrids and local storage of electricity, hopefully using sustainable methods such as wind or sun and so forth. But there is a concern that you can have a ripple effect through. It happened in the Northeast, and
well, you know, under the current regime, I call you, who is the next operator, and I say we're at capacity and we're losing it. You shut me down so you don't collapse. But that's because two people are talking to each other. We need a system that happens automatically, don't we?
Yes, and no, there are concerns. I mean, I have my own views on the proposal for creating a nationwide electrical charging system for electric cars. I think that becomes a real vulnerability. So if somebody takes down the electrical grid, you have all of these people who can't drive their cars. So I think that the idea of having your own source of energy, maybe solar or whatever, would be important if you want to keep your vehicles going. Any tendency towards integration of networks creates greater vulnerability.
So the new green technology, which some people criticize, is probably a good defense for the security of the country. I think that's what you're saying.
I believe so. You want this in a whole population of independent microgrids that don't depend on others.
But wouldn't those microgrids be just as vulnerable to collapse if there was no breaker?
Well, they would be separate. They wouldn't combine. That's how electricity started out. In the very early days of electricity, the grids were small and they only served a small area. And it became economically and politically feasible to create these large networks that are more cost effective. But there's a downside. So you have to balance the two.
I'm inviting everybody who has a question. That
you're talking a bit about a dichotomy where our USA method of building these kinds of things is through the free market system, and so it ends up being fragmented and therefore vulnerable, as opposed to a lot of the other countries that build these infrastructures in a monolithic way. It may be more secure, but it's not catering to free enterprise. So that's part of the problem we have as well. Our systems were built through free enterprise and therefore are fragmented, unfortunately. So Ernie, we got 15 minutes left. So let's ask Warren to move into the slideshow and make sure that he gets the rest of his content before we get to our questions. I'm going to go back to the slideshow, and Warren, hopefully we can get, like I said, through your content.
Okay.
Back to my Zoom meeting, back to sharing the slides. Okay. So risk.
Okay. Well, I think we most understand these. We've been through them.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't talked much about supply chain, but that's also a very vulnerable area.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that's been in the news. So the next couple of slides were my contribution. Warren and I discussed in advance, and what I wanted to bring and have you leave the meeting with a few things that you can do. And really, if everyone individually did these, it would strengthen the security throughout the country. So as much as it's one way to look at it is that someone needs to solve this problem, we all need to solve the problem. So what I'm saying, for instance, is two-factor authentication. Now, that's that annoying thing when you try to log into your bank and you can't do it until they text you a code. That is huge. That is a tremendous step forward in security. Because if some guy is sitting in a computer terminal in, Bulgaria or wherever he may be, and he has your password, he can't get in without another device, which in this case is your cell phone. And, our ATM cards have used this since they were invented, because you need the card and you need the PIN code. That's why there's two things, so that if somebody gets the PIN code, they don't have your card, and vice versa. So use that everywhere, not just on banking sites where you feel that it's important, but really use it everywhere it can be turned on. I know it can be an annoyance, but that's the whole point of security, is that we all have to deal with the annoyance in order to be more secure. Two-factor would have avoided the Colonial Pipeline break-in, because they used a old dormant user ID that what they were able to get access to the system with. But if that ID had been protected by some kind of two-factor, then just having the ID and the password wouldn't have gotten them in. The second thing that everyone can do to use stronger passwords is to use a password manager. And if you don't know what I mean, when we're done, write this down, Google password manager and see which one pertains to you. If you're an Apple person, iOS has one built in. Windows and Android also have them built in into your browsers, really, and they are free. The point is that it allows you to have much more complex passwords because you are not expected to memorize it like you may have in the past. If you can memorize it, it's probably too weak because that means that it's vulnerable to a dictionary attack or a brute force attack. A dictionary attack is when they just simply go through all the words in the dictionary and find, and they're smart enough now. So if you think you're so smart by substituting orange with the capital 0 instead of O, that's just another word in the dictionary. So anything you can memorize is probably not strong enough, but that's what password managers can do. Also, password managers allow you to not use the same password in more than one place. Because if you do, let's say you use a password in Netflix and Netflix is not very secure and you don't care about it. Figure, what's the worst they can do? They can watch movies for free. But if it's the same password that you use to view your home mortgage, well, now they might be able to get into your home mortgage account. And this is true for business as well as personal. One of the biggest problems in all of these systems is phishing. So what that means is that generally in an email, there'll be a link that some mortal clicks on and ends up giving the hackers exactly the information that they need. So this is the important sentence here. Do not trust links in unexpected emails. Sometimes emails have valid links in them, but you almost always expect them. If it comes out of the blue and it's unexpected, immediately that's your first alarm bell. Now, what to do? Let's say you do get an unexpected email from Netflix, let's say, and it says that your password needs to be reset or that you need to check your credit card or whatever. Well, what you can do is don't click on the link in the email. Instead, manually go to the website and type in netflix.com and enter their website and check what they said to check. If they said your credit card might be needing to be updated, the difference is you're not clicking that link in the email. The most important thing here is that if it's unexpected, that's an alarm bell. Don't even think twice about how legitimate it looks. Sure, it's as easy as copy paste to make the email look exactly like a Netflix email. People always say, oh, it just looked like Netflix. Well, duh. Think about how easy that would be if you were the hacker. You just copy paste a legitimate network's email and it's going to look exactly like a network's email. So don't consider that at all. Mostly think about whether it's expected. Sometimes you're expecting it, like for instance, Netflix may say when you go to reset your password that they're going to email you something to click on. That's legitimate. It's not unexpected. So unexpected is a key thing here. The third thing that I wanted to discuss was web application firewalls. Now, this bullet point really is mostly for businesses that have servers that are attached to the internet. And what web application firewalls do is they look for hackers before they reach the server. And so it's different than a regular firewall. This is sort of a second generation thing that looks for signatures of attacks. And if you're in a business and you have an attached server to the internet, ask whoever your IT person is about these web application firewalls. If your computer is connected to the internet, you should have a malware scanner like Norton Antivirus, McAfee, Windows Defender. Interestingly, we had a question come up about Kaspersky, which comes out of Russia. And I know a number of IT people in IT channels who have not trusted Kaspersky for years and years and years now, because it's a Russian company, and Chinese companies as well in this sector are suspect. Now, this question has come up, what to do if you're attacked. So Warren and I both agreed that these are good common sense steps. So the first thing you have to do is contact your IT staff and evaluate what you have in terms of backups. As Warren mentioned earlier, often the backups are part of the attack, because often nowadays the backups are on the internet. So one of the first things that I would do is take those backups and move them somewhere else before they disappear with the rest of the data. And then we want to find out, if we can, in a timely fashion, what happened. And importantly, can you secure it? As Warren pointed out, people tend to think that if you pay the ransom, then they won't come back. But that's not true. In fact, because these security holes are often publicized on the dark web, the second request for ransomware may be a completely different organization or person than the first. But if you suffer from the same security hole, you're not protected. It's like leaving your door open and then expecting, because you got robbed once, it's not going to happen again, but you never put a lock on the door. Next, I think you need to evaluate how you might resume operations using paper. So, knock wood, my experience with ransomware came years ago, and the company that I worked with said, you know what, we're going to give you a day or two to rebuild the systems, and in the meanwhile, we're just going to go take orders on paper, and we'll book them into the computer once the system is back up. And that worked in that particular scenario. And the business also made a decision early on that they would rather pay me the consulting fees that he would have to pay to restore from backup and spend those couple of days than give the money to the ransomware. But as Warren pointed out, sometimes it's cheaper to just pay the ransom. So now we talked about before whether the data could be made public, exfiltrating the public. And you've got to think about that. Some of my clients now are in the medical field, in the legal field, and their databases made public would be a whole level of damage that goes beyond their system being down. And so that needs to be considered before you decide what to do. Finally, in this last step, contact law enforcement. We actually went and found the FBI number for the New York area here. Question whether you pay the ransom. As Warren mentioned earlier, there's some controversy about whether that should be or should not be done, or whether it even should be considered legal. Finally, the option is to close the security holes, restore from backup, and to resume business without paying the ransom. As I mentioned, though, paying the ransom doesn't mean that you shouldn't close the security holes. You know that's really something that needs to be done, and it goes back to the prevention. Some of what I mentioned before are the easiest things you can do as a business or a person to prevent. Use stronger passwords, use two-factor authentication, and have everybody understand what phishing is and how to recognize a phishing attack. Common sense, unexpected links in those emails. So I think now we have how much time? Oh, we're almost out of time, but let's ask some of the questions. We have some questions from Ken. Ken, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. so you can ask your question.
Sure, and I have to be quick because I have to jump for a 10 o'clock meeting,
All
but
right.
thank you. So the question is, in the password managers, I've seen them for years, haven't used one. I worry, like, what if that gets hacked? Then all of your passwords get exposed. And we've had major systems hacked. It's not impossible. So what do you think about that?
Well, it's certainly a very good question. And I think the same way that you might ask that question about Citibank or any other large financial service,
Exactly.
they've taken steps to secure those highly sensitive information in a silo of information that is designed to be in a very high, much more highly secure situation than some of the other systems that we've talked about, even though they're critical. So a food service company or a pipeline just doesn't take the steps that a Citibank or an Apple or a Google take with these most secure pieces of data. So there is a chance, but it's like worrying about your valuables in a safe deposit box
Okay.
versus your valuables in the front hallway. You know,
Right.
sure,
Right.
there's still a chance that some,
it.
super sleuth will get into your safe deposit box, but it's not the same as your front hallway.
Super. Thank you. All right. Got to jump. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Two-factor authentication has been speeded up through the use of fingerprints and eye prints. Absolutely, Bob. Although there's some question as to the some of these conveniences make it less secure, particularly face recognition technology. Often looks at two people who are similar as the same face. Bob also brought up some points about USB drives and other methods of people getting in. And Lynn is making a point that phishing is done via text message. So yes, any unexpected link that comes in via text message, just because it arrived to you in a text message, when you click that link in a text message, you're now going to be jumped on the internet. So it's really just as dangerous as if you had clicked on that link in an email. Same deal. So again, if it's unsolicited, unexpected, then don't click on it. Take the precaution of going to the website on your own instead. Do we have any other questions? Reading through them here. Okay, Bob is bringing up looking up targets coming through the video monitors, and that's real interesting. So I protect servers every day. Every week, unfortunately, I'm dealing with some kind of a compromise. Often they're nuisances, really, truly nuisances. They want to just use my mail system to send out spam. They just want to, they're constantly trying to get into the website so they can, change the content on it. And some of these systems, though, show the IP addresses and the frequency of the attacks. I have to tell you, they're almost always from Russia, the largest amounts of frequency. That was until the last year, where they're now jumping onto AWS, Amazon Web Service, spinning up a server and then using that server as their attack server. So law enforcement would have to go one step further. Warren, is there anything else that you wanted to cover? Do we have any other questions before we move ahead? I think we just managed to wrap this up by 10 o'clock, which was pretty good.
Before we wrap up, I just want to make an appeal that we are a year of a pandemic and we've had revenue problems, and we like to continue this organization as long as we can and make it functional. And we're not seeing the same kind of revenues we saw. We're not broke, but we're not, we're not doing as well as we could. So your contributions, and some of you have given contributions, I want to thank you for doing that. But if you find it within your heart to put a nickel in the drum, your soul will be saved. I guarantee it.
And you can do that with a link on our website, limba.net, right?
And I want to thank everybody who attended today. It's always important that when you get a good important speaker like Warren, that the information has many places to be disseminated. And of course, I want to thank Warren for being here today. He is a great resource, and I think he'd be available to you or me or anybody if I get information from you that you need help. I'm sure I can contact Warren. He's been a resource for me for a couple of years now, a few years now.
Warren, you don't mind if I publish the slide deck as well in the meeting recap, would you? Because you've got some information in there that people can look at, may need to go back and look into further.
Sure, that's fine.
Great. So we'll discuss our our upcoming meeting, I mean?
Yes, please.
The Northeast Rail Initiative.
Yeah, Robert Yarrow is somebody I know for many years. I used to be involved with his organization. It's when he was the president of the New York planning group. And now he's taken on this enormous project to make rails available in the Northeast. It'll go everywhere from New York City all the way to Boston, all the way to northern Vermont and some other places, in the East, all the way to Maine, in fact. So it's a big, big project. I think it's about $160 billion that he's estimating it to be. And he's the kind of guy who gets things done. He's done a lot of planning over the last 20 years. And I'm looking forward to seeing an old friend again. So I hope you all tune into. I think it'll be a very interesting thing. And of course, there'll be people from the maglev company in the audience and adding their 2 cents and asking questions. So it'll be an interesting meeting. Again, thank you, Warren.
Yes, thank you, Warren. It was really an education.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, everyone, have a good few weeks.
All right.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.